Wonderful. It's my pleasure to introduce Dmitry Morozov, who will tell us about Apex representatives.
Thank you, Henry. And first of all, many thanks to organizers. Yasu Sensei, thank you very much. Thank you for your hospitality, Herbert, Henry. It's been I wish I could come earlier. It's been a fantastic conference. So I will tell you about Apex representatives, um, but I won't yet tell you what they are. I want to motivate the problem. Aha. Um, I really want to talk about zigzag persistence, which I don't know if it's been spoken about so far. And just by way of motivation, is some old work that Yuri Dabagyan, Facundo Memoli, Gunnar have done on these spatial memory maps. So there are cells in the brain that spike when an animal is in a particular part of the domain, and so they had some work that was studying the topology of the complex that you can build out of these spikes. So if two cells spike within some interval from each other, they get connected by an edge. And so what they showed is that if you run this process over time and you build up this complex, the persistence of the complex of these spiking cells in the brain will be the same as the topology of the domain in which the animal is exploring. So if the rat is running around an annulus, then eventually the persistence will show you that these place cells are spiking as an annulus. Now, the thing is, this is not a terribly realistic model in the sense that memory decays. So just because one cell spiked, it doesn't mean that we should keep it in the complex. And so a more realistic model is to have cells decay. So they may appear, and then if two of them spike at the same time, you add an edge between them. But then as time goes off, you remove them from the complex. And so a more reasonable sort of way to model this is using zigzag persistence, so where you can go inclusions alternate, they go in one direction and another direction, which is a follow-up work that we did with Andrei Babichev and Yuri Dabagyan. So the result there was similar, that if your tau, the decay rate, is in some biologically meaningful regime, then still the topology, the zigzag persistence, will recover the topology of the domain in which the animal is running. But one thing that is missing from that work and from much of the work in zigzag persistence is the ability to recover representative cycles that correspond to what's happening in the domain. So what are the same way that in persistence we can get cycles. We would like to get the same in zigzag persistence. And I will define more formally what I mean in a second. But there's been a lot of work. So this is just some example that I had a slide ready for. But there's been a ton of work, more recent work. So Woojin and Facundo did some work on dynamic metric spaces. Liz Munch with co-authors did some work on temporal network analysis. But this is all using zigzag persistence. But a gap that remains in all of this work is that if you want to get representative cycles in the domain, it's not clear how to do it. And so what do I mean by representative cycles? What I mean is that I want barcode representatives. So I want a compatible choice of bases that will diagonalize the maps. So if you have a zigzag sequence of homology groups, it decomposes as a direct sum of interval summons. And what I want is for every group in the sequence to find a set of representatives that one form a basis, but two that map into each other. So they in other words, if you find the representative for this bar in the space HK2, it will map into the representative that you found in HK1. Herbert, you look confused. Okay, so the idea is that we want one basis, but compatible bases. And just sort of as an illustration, so here's a zigzag of a bunch of spaces. We have three vertices and three edges, and this is its representation, decomposition into the barcode. And if we take this red bar and we want to get its compatible representatives, it's these red vertices. So these vertices, these two vertices, and these three vertices, they form. Can you see that, Herbert? Yeah, maybe. Okay. Yeah, that map well into each other on the homology level as you go to either side, and they map to zero when you leave the bar. Or alternatively, they're in the co-kernel if you're coming from the other direction. So sorry, so zigzag. This is the zigzag sequence, right? So I'm just showing you K1, K2, K3, K4, and now I picked one bar. And I asked what are its barcode representatives, which is in H0, I just need to give you a set of vertices. And so the red dots that I highlighted, they are barcode representatives. So these two are representatives in whatever this space is, these two in this space, these two in this space, and so forth. Right, so it's just a choice of a cycle such that the cycles map into each other, and they map to 0 as I leave the bar. No, these edges are honest to goodness edges. So there is an edge called H that goes VW. It's an honest to goodness simplicial complex. Yeah, it's super simple simplicial complex, but it's simplicial complex nonetheless. Yeah, great. Yes, makes sense. Yasu says, okay, great. So I want to point out that this problem is completely trivial for ordinary persistence because all the maps go forward. So if you find the representative in the very first space, it will keep mapping into subsequent spaces. And unless you do something truly exotic, it will map to 0 when the bar dies. But for zigzags, that's not the case. In fact, the zigzag problem sort of reminds me of the ship of Theseus, right? That it gets completely rebuilt, so you can have a bar that's supported over some sequence of spaces, such that representative in the first space simply doesn't exist in the last space, right? So you have to do something. Okay, so most algorithms for computing zigzag persistence, they actually do keep track of a basis of representatives for the current homology group and update it as you go through the zigzag. For example, the first algorithm that Gunnar and Bin suggested. But what they don't do is they don't produce compatible bases. And there are two reasons for that. One, they simply don't consider the problem. But two, you actually cannot do it in a single pass. You have to be able to look back. And an easy way to see it is on this slide. So imagine that my oh, this is too complicated. Imagine that my sequence stopped. Okay, it's good. Imagine that my sequence stopped here. Okay, so like the zigzag stopped here. Then I could have chosen just this vertical to be my representative for this bar. But as soon as I see this edge E, because it has to go through 0, I know that I actually need at least 2 vertices, so that because the vertical by itself is not going to count there. So unless if you only go forward, as most of these algorithms do, you cannot actually compute compatible representatives because you have to be able to go back. Yeah, and so this requires some extra bookkeeping, which is challenge because it's expensive. Because if you need to update a barcode representative, adding 2 of them costs you quadratic time as opposed to linear time in ordinary persistence. Nonetheless, we worked out an algorithm with Tamal and Tao, who this is also joint work with, which appeared in this soda. And that algorithm the computation was order of m cubed. And then in quadratic time, you can report 1 or actually all representatives for the bar. And if you think about this problem naively, this may seem that this is as well as one can do. And simply because the output size, at least superficially, appears to be cubic. There are linear number of bars. Each one is supported over a linear number of spaces, and each representative in each space is linear in size. So the whole output is cubic. So maybe cubic is sort of the best you can hope for. And so in this talk, I will show that you can actually do this in matrix multiplication time, plus some m squared log m time to recover apex representatives, which I haven't defined yet. And sort of more to the point, the real content of this problem is actually quadratic. So that's maybe more interesting. And then once you do this pre-processing, you can recover any representative that you want in time that is log m plus the output, the size of this representative. And this algorithm is super simple to implement. In fact, if you listen carefully, you may be able to do it in the course of this talk. Maybe not, but close enough. So it's not unique, as you can imagine, right? I can change. What does it say? The usual, right? In homology, nothing is unique. I can change representatives, but I choose a cycle over every space that the bar is supported on, such that the cycle chosen over space I maps into space I plus 1, or backwards. And at the boundaries, either the cycle is in the co-kernel if the map comes in, or it goes to 0 if the map goes out. There could be a lot of cycles. Yes. So and that's why sort of this cubic thing appears to be, at least superficially, appears to be like that's the best you can hope for. Okay, so in order to explain what we do, I need to change. I need to introduce a little bit of a problem, a little bit of geometry to this problem. And so the idea is the following: that your input is really a simplicial complex. Let's call it K for now. And for every simplex in the complex, you have an interval, a time interval, so for which it appears. And it doesn't have to be one interval; it could be multiple intervals. So the edge E, it appears, then disappears, it appears, then disappears. And what I want to do is I want to replace this complex by what I call a prism construction, which simply stretches out the simplices over the bars. You just take the simplices cross the time intervals, and you get this prism. And now when you have this, then it of course comes with the function f, which is just projection onto the real line, onto the time axis. And when you have this prism, the original zigzag that you're given is actually a level set zigzag of this function f. And so what is a level set zigzag? Yes, and the level set zigzag is this sort of old idea that introduced with Garner and Bin in 2009, that if you have a function, a scalar function on some topological space, you can slice it with intervals. So you take a little slice of an interval and you pull it up to the level set. You take a little slice with an interval, you pull it up to the level set. And you keep slicing through the space, and you get a zigzag of these slices. So this is the zigzag we call the level set zigzag. And so yeah, so if I go back, you can. It's not difficult to see. So what I wrote here is exactly a level set zigzag, right? So these are just slices, level sets, and these are interlevel sets that connect them. And well, I think by the picture, it's more or less immediate that this is the same as the same decomposition as the original zigzag. And so the reason that level set zigzag and looking at this as a scalar function is interesting is that there is this Maivy-Torres pyramid construction. So the Maivy-Torres pyramid is this idea that if you take interlevel sets of your space, of your function, you can arrange them in this kind of, well, in this case for now, a triangle, where the level sets on the bottom. So this is XA level set, XB level set, and the interlevel set XAB, I will put here. Right, and so there are inclusions that are all going up in this pyramid, right? So for any two numbers on the real line, I can put the interlevel set and that spans them. You can extend this using relative homology by well, I think of them as sort of half open intervals. So this is really, you can take the super level set at A and relative to the super level set at B, which I think of as an interval AB that is closed on the left and open on the right. So it's a little interval here. And on the left, you can extend this by taking sublevel set. So sublevel set at B relative to sublevel set at A, which is again an interval AB open on the left. And on the top, you can do the same thing with open intervals. So it's again intervals AB that are open on both ends. And so the level set zigzag is simply now a sequence of spaces that goes along the bottom edge of this pyramid. Another sequence that we sort of know and love is extended persistence, which is exactly this major diagonal through this pyramid. And extended persistence, if you don't remember it off the top of your head, is this idea that Herbert and David Kornsteiner and John Hare introduced 20 years ago, apparently, that if you compute ordinary persistence, you sweep up with sublevel sets, and then you can sweep, and so the homology of the space now appears as these classes that live to infinity. But now you can start sweeping down by taking relative homology relative to the super level sets. And so as you do this, you get a sequence that looks like ordinary persistence, but all the classes that live to infinity, they will now be at some point railed out, and you will get sort of finite lifetimes for them, and you get this relative persistence diagram. And there are different kinds of classes in this diagram. So there are classes that come from the ordinary sequence, so they're born and die on the way up. There are classes that come strictly from the relative sequence, so they are born as you go down and die as you go down. And there are classes that are that sort of essential classes that become now extended classes that are born on the way up and die on the way down. And so this is, so is there a question? So this is this major diagonal is exactly this extended persistence. And the reason this is called a Majority-Torres pyramid is that if you look at any little diamond in the sequence, it has this Majority-Torres structure. Namely, the space on the left is going to be some interval xcb, space on the right is going to be some interval xid, and the space at the bottom is going to be an intersection of these two intervals, and the space at the top is going to be the union of these two intervals, right? And this offers some additional structure that one can exploit. Yeah, and there are also, okay, I'll come back to this. There are maps, boundary maps that take you into one dimension down. The additional structure is sort of Vin and Gunnar, when they wrote their paper about zigzag persistence, they immediately recognized that there is this extra structure that if you have two zigzags that so here's a zigzag that goes through the intersection, and you take two zigzags that are connected, that differ by this Majority-Torres diamond, then the decomposition of the zigzag through the bottom, through the intersection, and the decomposition of the zigzag through the top, through the union, they're actually related, right? So here you have one connected component, two connected components, one connected component, so one of them carries through. And so it just, in H naught, you have a bar that goes through and a bar here. But as you go through the union, the bar, one of the bars, this pointwise bar in H naught shifts to H1. So there are some translation rules, but because there is this exact structure, you can work out what they are. And so they stated this theorem that there's a bijection between the intervals that are associated to two modules that differ by a Majority-Torres diamond. Here's another example. So the rules can be slightly different, right? So if you, I mean, they're not, it's not just that bars shift in dimension, but they can also shift, their endpoints can shift, right? So as you go through the bottom, you have an annulus, a circle. So you have a bar that goes through two spaces, but through the union, it shifts to the left and it becomes supported in a single space. And so with Herbert and Paul Bendich and Amit, we stated, we observed a slightly stronger theorem that not only are there these bijections between the bars, but they actually work at the level of the basis of the homology groups. So you can extend the basis from let's say the zigzag that goes through the bottom to the zigzag that goes through the top. And so the rules are the same for the translation. So you can write them out explicitly, how death and birth shift as you go across the Majority-Torres diamond. But the fact that this works at the level of the basis for the homology groups means that you can now take a bar in the decomposition of the level set zigzag and just apply these translation rules, and you can extend it to the bar that is, well, not a bar really, this is kind of like a flush diamond, I call it, that's supported over the entire pyramid. But it's really, and in fact, because of the Majority-Torres sequence, it starts in one dimension lower. But this bar is really not just sort of a rule for translation, but it's actually an honest to goodness summand of this pyramid. So you can peel off a one-dimensional summand that looks like this flush diamond. And so the statement is that if you unroll this pyramid, so you do this on homology, you unroll it, there are boundary maps that connect top row of one-dimensional homology to the bottom row of zero-dimensional homology. You get this Majority-Torres sort of strip unrolled. And the point is that it decomposes as direct sum of one-dimensional summands that look like these diamonds. Yeah, so here zooming in, this is sort of what the picture looks like. And a lot has been written about this since then. So Steve has wrote about this, Uli has papers about this, and there's a lot has been said about it. So now for the so just to give an idea of where I'm going to call the very bottom space in this of the summands, I will call them apexes, because it's the very top sort of this summand. So what I will look for are these apex representatives. And so the idea is okay. Actually, let me say one more thing. The same way that I said that there are four different types of indecomposables in either the level set or zigzag or extended persistence. These correspond to four different types of summands that appear in the pyramid, depending on where their apex, the lowest point, lies. If it lies in the bottom triangle, it corresponds to one type of extended persistence summand. If it lies in the, for example, in this bottom left triangle, then it corresponds to the ordinary class in the extended persistence. And you can see this by how these diamonds intersect the respective diagonals. Because if you have this one-dimensional, if you know that this is a one-dimensional summand of the entire pyramid, now in order to get a summand decomposition for the levels at zigzag, well, you simply have to intersect these flush diamonds with the levels at zigzag. If you want it for extended persistence, you have to intersect it with extended persistence. Yeah, and so what I now the idea behind this work that I'm talking about today is that if you have one of these diamond summands and you can find a representative for its apex, so in other words for the initial space in the diamond, well then all the maps are going forward. You're actually exactly in the same situation as ordinary persistence. And so you can simply take that representative and you can map it into any other representative in the pyramid, including to levels at zigzag, which will give us representatives for the original zigzag. But of course, it gives you a lot more. And by way, sorry, I'm confused how I'm on time. I'm okay on time. So by way of a picture, so here's a summand whose apex is in the absolute part of the pyramid. So this in the interval x bd, and this so an example of that for this torus is a cycle that goes around the hole, sort of the tightest cycle. And it's so the point is that this has to be an absolute cycle that is supported on the preimage of the interval bd. And this is in fact an absolute cycle. The red cycle that is it's supported on the preimage of bd. And so that's an example of an apex representative. For this is the relative. So if your apex falls on this left side of the pyramid, so BD interval that's open on the right. So here's an example. So it has to be a relative cycle that's supported, that lives in the that lives in the super level set of B, but it's a cycle relative to the super level set of D. So here's an example, right? It's the cycle that corresponds to the chain that kills sort of there's a birth and a death at the settle, and that's this red chain is exactly the apex representative. So if we can compute this, then we can find the representative for any other space in the sequence. Herbert. This one, it intersects this diagonal. Well, the other one it intersects. So because the Myvitor strip is glued with the reversal. So the left becomes the right? So you see here R goes in this direction and here R goes in this direction. And so because of this, these diagonals, they actually revert. So this shows, for example, extended persistence is this diagonal and then this diagonal. And so here extended persistence is this diagonal and then this diagonal, but the other diagonal is actually extended persistence of negative f. And that also appears here. It's this diagonal, which it also intersects, but in one dimension lower. So there are the shifts of dimension, but yeah. So I guess every one of these sequences, every diamond will intersect because it's flush with the sides. Other questions? I very much prefer questions as we go rather than. Okay. So here's a third example, namely the complement. So this would correspond to ordinary persistence. The apex is in the part of the pyramid that corresponds to the intervals BD open on the left. And here's an example, right? So it's this red chain. It's a relative cycle. It lives in the sublevel set of D, and it's a cycle because its boundary is in the sublevel set of B, right? It's a relative cycle. And the last example is if the apex is in the open interval part of the pyramid. An example is the essential class that lives from B to D. And again, so it's supported on the interval BD, but its boundary is in the sublevel set of B and the superlevel set of D. Yeah. Bay. Yeah. Also, so this is an example of an extended persistence class, right? That's right. So in extended persistence, you're going to have a component born at B that is going to be killed off when we roll off at D. The apex representative is going to be a one-dimensional chain that connects the minimum, the global minimum with the global maximum. And it's a relative cycle in this X open B, open D, because it's supported on the interval BD, and its boundary is in D and in B. Make sense? Yes, yes, yes. Okay. So the apex representatives actually have a very simple characterization, which is sort of evident from all of this. You, a cycle is going to be an apex representative if and only if it lives in this apex space, and it's not in the image of the two maps that come into the space from below. Right? That's exactly what it means for this to be a summoned. So it's and this is actually just a very powerful characterization, because what it says is that if I can show you a cycle that lives in the space and doesn't come from below, then I found you an apex representative. So A, I told you that there's going to be a persistence interval, but B, I also told you all the possible representatives you can ask for, right? And so just again, maybe while we're on this slide, so for example, this cycle is an apex representative because it is supported on BD. But now if I go down, it means that either I go from D to D minus epsilon, or I raise B from B to B plus epsilon. And of course, if I do this, then my cycle will no longer be a closed cycle in the absolute sense. And same story is true everywhere, right? So if I raise B a little bit, this will stop being a cycle. If I lower or raise D a little bit, this guy will stop being a cycle. And so it's a purely kind of local, in the sense of the pyramid, way to characterize, is what I found an apex representative or not? Okay, great. So if this part makes sense, and I think it does, yes, because you're not asking questions. So yeah, okay. The question is how to compute all of this. And the problem is that the prism, so I talked about the prism, it's very easy to reason about, it gives rise to this Vittorius pyramid. The trouble is it's huge, right? I mean, you really, every complex in your zigzag is now represented explicitly in this prism. And so the idea is the following, that we can go back to the original complex, but we're going to modify it a little bit. We're going to replace it with a delta complex, where if a simplex E appears twice, for example, in the zigzag, what we will do is we will draw two simplices E1 and E2, such that each one of them will appear once. So this is a delta complex construction that Hetcher talks about. So you slightly relax the condition that two simplices can only intersect in the common face. They can intersect in multiple faces. And then what's nice about this is that if I now take the following definitions, I will say that a sublevel set Ki are going to be all those simplices sigma in my delta complex K whose left endpoint of the intervals is less than or equal to I. And the superlevel set J is going to be all those simplices whose right endpoint, the maximum, appears at or above J. So if I take these two definitions, then I can define the same kind of preimages of closed and half open and open intervals by taking the appropriate intersections of these and possibly relative pairs of these intervals. And these spaces, they form a Maya-Vittorius pyramid of their own. And because they form a Maya-Vittorius pyramid of their own, in which the level set zigzag is actually exactly the input zigzag, you can simply compute the extended persistence of this space via the cone construction that David, Herbert, and John introduced, where you simply sweep through the sublevel sets, and then you rel out the super level sets, and what you will get is a sequence that you can translate back into the level set zigzag. And this is actually exactly the algorithm that Tamal and Tao introduced 3 years ago, that they called fast zigzag algorithm, which reduces computation of zigzag persistence to ordinary persistence. So instead of doing all the yoga that the different zigzag algorithms do, you can just compute your usual RDV decomposition and you're done. And the kind of, well, great thing, but also slightly demoralizing thing is that this is very fast in practice. This is much better than any zigzag algorithm that's existed before. But now, if we have this RDV decomposition, the question is, can we extract the apex representatives from that? And so the problem is roughly the following. So here's our zigzag. Here's the delta complex. So we really have in the zigzag 3 vertices and 3 edges. So it's really the space, the total space of the zigzag is this triangle, where to every simplex we attach the interval during which it appears in the input zigzag. So that's the input, and then you can compute extended persistence of this complex, and in this extended persistence you will have some cycle. Let's say this one cycle that's red. And so the question is, how do we now get what I really want is I want to lift it to our prism, to this cycle, the red cycle that goes through the prism, because because this is the apex representative for this interval 11, 17, because if I now can get this representative, this apex representative, well then simply taking intersections through this representative, I will get the zigzag representatives in my original input. Yeah? No? Maybe? Okay, so the problem is that, so this is efficient to compute, but now we want to go from this cycle to this apex representative in the prism. And the algorithm that we introduced for this, the idea is that you can stretch the cycle from the delta complex over your prism. The idea is roughly the following: that you sweep, let's say, from right to left. You take an edge. This is an edge in your prism, and now you take its boundary and you start stretching it over the prism. And I stretch until I encounter another cycle, so another edge rather, in this case H. So I add this H to the prism, I add its boundary, and now what I have to stretch are these 2 vertices. And I keep going, and I encounter the next edge, and I add it, and I'm done. So this gives me a cycle, and it's a cycle supported over the right interval over the pyramid, which means it's going to be the apex representative. The algorithm is stated is worst case quadratic, but you can change it into something that is that takes m log m time by thinking of it from the point of view of the in this case vertices. So from the point of view of faces, but maybe I don't go into that. Yeah, and so with this algorithm, all we have to know is which cycles we have to lift. And so for the ordinary classes, so this is the class that is born here and that dies at the settle. This red chain is exactly the cycle that you need to lift, and is given to you by the column v tau in your RDV decomposition. So it's because the column v is exactly the chain that tells you that this vertex merges with this vertex. And that's exactly the chain that if you lift, you'll get an apex. Similarly, for the relative, you have to take column of r tau hat, which is the cone simplex that's going to kill the cycle when it's added at B, and you have to intersect it with the base space. For the cycles like this, it's actually just the column r tau hat itself. So the cycle is going to be born here, but it's going to die when it's coned off at B, and the boundary of that the column r tau hat of that simplex is what's going to give you this red cycle. And similarly here, it's a little bit more complicated, but it's also, you have to get it v tau from the column of matrix V, but you have to bootstrap it because there's no boundary, so you also have to bootstrap it with some r tau. The details are all in the paper. Okay, and so if you have these apex representatives, well then, now to recover the zigzag representatives is actually very simple, right? We said that all the maps go forward, and not only do they all go forward, but almost all of them are just inclusions, right? I mean, literally everything in this pyramid is inclusion, except at the very edge, we're going to have to take a boundary map. And so what happens is that, so suppose that we have a representative, an apex representative in red here. We, for technical reasons, have to perturb something, but that's not important. And then you can map it forward to the space that's just before your level set zigzag. And this map forward is just the inclusion. I mean, this red cycle is actually a perfectly good representative at this space. It's just that much more with is rolled out. And then you, in order to go into the level set, you simply take the boundary, which means that what's really going on is that we go down to some interval ix, and then we take the part of it that only those vertices that intersect the interval x. So in other words, this apex representative is described by some vertical cells, which are part of our original input, and by some, in this case, vertices cross time intervals, so horizontal chains. And we, in order to report the respective zigzag representative, we just have to intersect the time at which we're interested with these intervals for every one of these chains. And for this, there is an old data structure developed by a young computer scientist in 1980, H. Adelsbrunner. I think it may have been even in his PhD thesis. Yeah, called an interval tree. And using interval trees, you can do this in O log n time plus c is the size of the output. So it's actually extremely simple. So you compute extended persistence on your delta complex. You lift the representatives into apex representatives, of which there are only linear, and each one is linear times p, where p is the homological dimension in size. And then from each one of those, to extract the zigzag representatives, you simply intersect the time with whatever time you're querying it. So whichever space you're interested in. There's one more thing that I find kind of very nice about thinking about these apex representatives. Because one thing that I find a little opaque about zigzag persistence is if you want to think about, so Herbert asked in the beginning, like something about uniqueness or how these zigzag representatives look, and they're not unique because you can change bases. But the way you can change bases is a little bit awkward. Like there are very complicated rules that you can spell out where, for example, if you have a zigzag like this, a bar like this in your zigzag persistence and a bar like this, you're allowed to add them together and it will give you a different representative for this bar. But for example, if I had a bar that looked like this, so it didn't go all the way to the end, now I'm not allowed to add them. The result won't be a barcode representative. And if you think about it for a second, it's not actually mysterious. The problem is that if I add whatever cycle I have here to whatever cycle I have here, it's not now going to be in the image of whatever the only cycle that I have here. But it's kind of, I mean, it's weird, right? So if I were to write out all such rules, there are too many of them, and it's not terribly pleasant. But if you ask for the same rules in terms of the apex representatives, they're actually completely trivial. You can add one summand, or you can add one apex representative to another, only if the sum. So you can add an apex. You can add if you have two summons v and u, and you want to change the apex representative at v, you're allowed to do it as long as u is supported over v. So that you're allowed to do. And if you translate what this means in terms of the input zigzag, you get exactly these complicated rules yeah, these kinds of complicated rules. Oh, I realized I'm way ahead of schedule because I'm okay. Well, we'll have a longer coffee break. Yeah, so that I find very nice, and I think this is also useful for like there's a lot of interest in finding. I mean, Ipe talked about optimal volumes, right? So trying to manipulate representatives in ways that satisfy some other conditions. The fact that it's so easy to express what are the allowable changes of bases, that makes it convenient to try to optimize something, right? You now know which changes you're allowed to make, and it's very, very easy to express. Okay, so in summary, given a zigzag on some complexes ki, you change it to extended persistence computation on the cone. This you can compute in matrix multiplication time. Then you lift each cycle to in this delta complex or in this cone k hat to cycle z bar in the prism. That takes p m log m time. And then from the apex representative, you can extract a zigzag representative for any space by using interval tree, by taking these intersections of the time intervals, and that you can do in log m plus c time. And yeah, so as I said, this is simple to implement. Instead of manipulating zigzag representatives, you can manipulate apex representatives, and I think that's more efficient and interesting. And I really think, I mean, I talked about zigzags because that was my motivating problem, but I really think of these apex representatives as a kind of universal representatives, because once you compute them, you can extract the representative for any other space in the pyramid. Not level set zigzag, extended persistence, some random interlevel sets, basically anything you want, simply because all the maps go out of the apex. You can just push it forward, and you push it forward just by inclusion plus one boundary, which is really like taking intersections. And so it's efficient and easy to manipulate and easy to think about. So on that note, I'm going to stop and thank you for your time.